can say anything about my life up to this point. I can say that I've been lucky. I grew up on an idyllic farm in a traditional, for the most part normal, family unit. My parents were honest and hardworking with solid values, and I felt safe and loved. But that situation, especially in society today, is not the norm. In 1960, 73% of children in America lived in traditional families. In 1980, the percentage dropped to 61. And now, for the first time in history, less than 50%, it's 46 to be exact, 46% of children do not have the life growing up that I did. No doubt, in at least some of these situations, not all of course, the children feel lost, unprotected, and alone. And then there are the orphans. Now we're just talking about America right now, but 400,000 children in America. Think at least a city of Omaha. Think about Omaha, the size of the city of Omaha. And about that many kids are in foster care. They're waiting to be adopted. And on average, 30,000, that's about 3 Carol's worth or 6 Harlems, will never, ever go on to be adopted, and will just go out into the world when they're 18. They've never had the security of a family. And worldwide, just in Asia, 60 million children do not have any families at all. See why I feel lucky? And if you were as fortunate as I was, consider yourself blessed. One of the most heart-wrenching comments I ever heard my dad say happened after my mom passed away, after they'd been married for 53 years. He said, and I've heard other people say this too, he said the hardest part about losing someone is coming home to an empty house with something exciting to tell, and no one is there. He said you can go somewhere and there's nobody home to care if you come home or not. And even though he still had brothers and a sister and still had us, he felt alone because the only person who really understood him, his life partner, was gone. And so I can only imagine how orphans who have lost or been separated from their parents, or children of immigrants who have had their family members taken from them, must feel. The feelings of insecurity, uncertainty, and heartbreak would be overwhelming. A place where the tears never stop. But this is where the good news of our scriptures comes into our lives today. No matter what kind of family, traditional and safe, dysfunctional, abusive, or somewhere in between, we have all been adopted by the Creator of the universe. Paul writes, all who are led by God's Spirit are God's sons and daughters. You didn't receive a spirit of slavery to lead you back into fear, but you receive the Spirit that shows you are adopted as His children. With this Spirit we cry, Abba, Father, Paul says. Abba, by the way, means Father, but it means more than that. It means the Father, the main man. Now, to those of us who've been doing this church thing for a while, the fact that we're God's children doesn't seem like a big deal to us anymore, but it is. To explore that idea, let's look at our other scripture from this morning from Isaiah. Isaiah was a court prophet. He was a hand-picked favorite of the king to give moral and spiritual guidance. Isaiah was part of the king's family, King Uzziah's family, that is. He had a nice place to live in the kingdom, and he had plenty of money and security. And then King Uzziah died. That was a game changer. All Isaiah's security disappeared, and his position in the king's family was uncertain. Because who could guess what the next king would do? Then Isaiah got a vision of God on the throne. Isaiah could only see the bottom half of God, and his robe because God's face was too bright for anyone to look at. 6 winged creatures surrounded God, singing, Holy, 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 Lord of heavenly forces, all the earth is full of God's glory. Now, if you can just imagine what that would be like if you came face to face with the Almighty. Wow. Isaiah, scared out of his mind, and he was awestruck, and he said, I'm ruined. I'm a sinner living in a land of sinners. Isaiah pretty much thought he was toast. But then, a winged creature touched Isaiah's lips with a coal and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is departed and your sin is removed. This was the moment that Isaiah was adopted into God's family. That was like the signature on the adoption form. And he became one of God's own family, commissioned to do God's work. Now, going back to Paul, when we look at how people in Paul's time viewed adoption, it's different from today. Children were under control of their parents for life, not just until they were 18. And childless couples of that time would adopt so that they would have heirs. So when Paul says we're adopted into God's family, we are God's children, whether we're 9 or whether we're 90. He writes, but if we are children, we are also heirs. We are God's heirs and fellow heirs with Christ if we really suffer with him, so that we can be glorified with him. Children who are adopted into a new family soon discover that changes are coming and they have obligations to fill. It's the same with being adopted by God as his children. Paul writes, so then, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation, but it isn't an obligation to ourselves to live our lives on the basis of selfishness. He continues, if you live on the basis of selfishness, you're going to die. But if you put to death the actions of the body with the Spirit, you will live. A youngster adopted into a family might have to learn that there are some new rules to follow. There are chores to do. There's a bedroom to share, homework to do. There are also maybe brothers and sisters to consider, and that requires a change of attitude. It's the same with us as God's children. The first big change of attitude comes when we change from the world of me, myself, and I to he, himself, and him. God, that is. And when we shift our focus to he, himself, and him, we have to follow the rule of loving him with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves. Our priorities instantly change because God is who he is. The cell phone doesn't become as important as the Bible. Ball games on Sunday don't take priority over worship. Our excess purchases, when we go shopping till we drop, don't take priority over feeding the poor or helping someone in our community who's struggling. Watching reality TV does not come before calling someone who is sick or helping a family member around the house. So in other words, that means no more selfishness. In his book on being a real person, Henry Emerson Fosdick wrote, "A great day comes when a man begins to get himself off his hands. He has lived, let us say, in a mind like a room surrounded by mirrors. Every way he turned, he saw himself. Now, however, some of the mirrors changed to windows." He's saying that we go from being concerned with our own reflections in the mirror to those outside our little worlds. We come surrounded by windows to the outside world. It means, with the Spirit's help, we begin to care, really care, about starving children, about people without water, people who are affected with disasters, or people who are hurting, instead of just changing the channel on the television and pretending as if we don't see. I remember one of the first lessons I learned in Sunday school, and it sounds like you're all planning Bible school. Never underestimate the importance of Bible school and Sunday school, because those lessons that you teach will stick. Because what I'm telling you now is a lesson that I learned in Sunday school, and I'm old. And the fact that I remember it this long just tells you how important Bible school and Sunday school are. We learned this lesson with the candy bar. We were taught, when you break the candy bar in two, you always give the other person the bigger part of the candy bar. Always. Now, for a little kid with a candy bar, that's pretty hard to do, right? Because they want to keep the bigger part of the candy bar for themselves. But that really stuck with us. You always give the bigger part to the other person. And I'm not so sure that we do that anymore. It appears to me that our society is becoming more selfish, and it's not true of everybody. But it seems to me that we're less focused on the needs of others. I did a little research on this and found that children are not born selfish, just as they are not born prejudiced. We teach them to be that way with our lifestyles. Children are born seeking connection with others, but we, in our air-conditioned, heated houses, with everything we could possibly want in the way of technology, we become more isolated. Now, I know these are coming back on some of the new houses, but many of us are old enough to remember the days of the front porch. Sitting on the front porch, and people would walk by, and then they'd chit-chat, and they'd come and join you on the porch. And now, we don't always know the neighbors immediately around us, because everybody has become so isolated. And we're missing something. We always take more food than we need. We throw the rest out. If something is free, we take extra. We want extra cars, plenty of clothes, way too many clothes and shoes and electronics and stuff and more stuff. We don't need it, but we take it anyway. And then even though our natural resources are limited, we buy vehicles that take a lot of gas. Some car makers have dropped small cars from their lineups because they want to sell the SUVs and the pickups that take more gas because they make more money off of them. What does that tell us? We don't care. We say we care, but in a lot of our habits, we're not really taking care of God's creation. You know, we think we are. We're selfish. We're not thinking about generations down the road. Part of being a family is taking lumps with the family. When one family member is sick, it's the rest of the family's responsibility to pick up the extra chores. I know when I was little, and if mom and dad or our school bus drivers were driving in heavy traffic or bad weather, our responsibility as kids is to be quiet and not take away their concentration. We had our job. It was to shut up. As part of God's family, when we suffer heartache or loss or sacrifice, we can then relate to what Christ has done for us. Once in a while, we need to take our lumps for Christ, but I'm not sure we always want to do that. We just want to sing Kumbaya, which means come by here, and not have to do that much. As part of the family, we have chores to do, so the family functions more effectively. In the same way, as Christians in God's family, we have chores to do. Isaiah in the Old Testament, in response to God's act of forgiveness, said, "Here I am, Lord, send me." Out of gratitude for being part of God's family and out of love for Him, we should be willing to do chores in the kingdom. And often that means sacrificing me, myself, and I for He, Himself, and Him, and taking risks for Him. It means giving up time for Him by helping others. We need to ask ourselves some serious questions. When was the last time you went out to eat and paid for the other person's meal? When was the last time you listened to someone even though it made you late? When was the last time you helped an elderly person pack groceries into his or her car? You saw somebody struggling in the parking lot and you went over to help them. When did you send a flower or a card to a public service worker or to a mayor or official just to say thanks for doing a good job? I was talking to the mayor of our town a few years back, and he says, "Boy, I don't know about this mayor job." He said, "All you get is complaints." Maybe the mayor needs a thank you note. Mostly, all they do, as I said, get complaints. And when did you follow the leading of the Spirit and do something that was out of your comfort zone, like knocking on the door of a stranger in town and inviting him to church? When did you last throw away a trinket catalog of collectibles you wanted, or walk past the candy bar section and redirect that money to someone who's starving to death? Yes, it's a wonderful privilege to be adopted into God's family and to be considered the beloved children of the Creator of the universe, and we should never, ever take that for granted. And not taking it for granted requires an attitude shift from inward selfishness to outward selflessness. It means to take one for the team, God's team, as far as inconvenience goes, and it means that we have an obligation to do the chores of the kingdom and follow God's rules. There was a story of a young couple who visited a boarding care home which housed children for adoption. The caretaker brought out all the children who were clean, freshly bathed and dressed, properly schooled in manners for this couple's inspection and selection. As they passed down the line and spoke to each child, they did not find the one they were looking for to adopt. They asked the caretaker, "Do you have any more children?" He replied, "Yes, but he's not been cleaned up or dressed for viewing today." The couple said immediately, "That's all right. Can we see him?" After a few minutes, the child was brought out and stood with the rest of the children. He was dirty, face unwashed, hair uncombed, clothes ragged and torn, no shoes, and his head was hanging down in shame as he stood next to the other children. After a few minutes of somber discussion and wiping the tears from their eyes, they said to the caretaker, "We want this child." The man replied, "But he's not as nice as the other children. He's unmannered and unloved by his own parents." He continued, "And we've been unable to get him to behave. Why do you want him?" The couple paused to regain their composure and replied, "We see in him the blessings of God for our home and a better hope in life for him." With shame, the man asked, "Do you want us to clean him up?" The couple replied lovingly, "No, we want the child just as he is right now." That's how God sees us. He wants us just as we are right now. No matter how ashamed, sinful, and disheveled we are, and he will never, ever give up on us or reject us. He has adopted us for the long haul, now and into eternity. And what a mind-boggling, wonderful thing that is. A few lines of a song Sandy Carroll sang for us when we recognized the graduates really pulls the wonderfulness of this all together. The first verse says, "I was there to hear your warning cry. I'll be there when you are old. I rejoiced the day you were baptized to see your life unfold." And the last verse, "When the evening gently closes in and you shut your weary eyes, I'll be there as I have always been, with just one more surprise." We have been adopted into God's family from the moment we took our first breath until we take our last and go home to be with him forever. We can count on that. Thanks be to God. We are adopted and can live a life that does not glorify me, myself, and me, but he, himself, and him. Amen.